Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Neera Tanden. I'm president of the Center for American Progress, and welcome to this really important conversation today. This event is entitled An Urgent Warning from Texas, a conversation on defending democracy and fighting authoritarianism in the states, and I cannot think of a really more timely conversation. I'm so grateful to our colleagues, Congressman Beto O'Rourke and esteemed attorney Norm Eisen. I will introduce them more fully in a moment, but I'm just so pleased that we are here at this time because news just broke over the last week or so about President Trump's effort to direct the state of Texas to redistrict in order to ensure Republicans maintain power. Essentially, the current maps are ones that are more fair than what they would like. And looking ahead to the midterms, this is a basic case of where people in power worry that they will not be able to win an election. It is to change the rules of the game. And I think it's so crucial that we learn about this effort and then really describe what we can each do to address it. So obviously, we'll dive into the facts here, but just with a little bit more introduction. Beto O'Rourke is a former congressman who runs Power to the People, which is a grassroots organization that has done incredible work in Texas to mobilize voters to expand voter registration. As I understand it, is the biggest voter registration organization in Texas. Is that correct, Beto? Excellent. And I feel like a fellow soldier on the field, Ambassador Norm Eisen, who runs Democracy Defenders, and has won so many cases in this really extra legal time that we're in. If there is one entity trying to maintain our democracy and keep us following the rule of law, it is your organization with so many other legal organizations that have won multiple TROs that have protected people's rights. So if we could give each of them a round of applause, that would be great. Okay, so we'll just get started. Beto, what's happening in Texas? Could you explain this process to us?
As you alluded, the legislature convened yesterday to, among other things, redraw the congressional maps in the state of Texas. The goal, as stated by President Trump, is to pick up 5 more Republican seats currently held and represented by Democrats, most likely, coincidentally or not, each of those seats held by a Democrat who is either Black or Mexican-American. That's what they're doing. It's members of Congress choosing their own voters, literally. Why he's doing this, you also alluded to this. The president is growing increasingly more unpopular. His signature policy issues like immigration, I think, is polling at 35% today. The so-called Big Beautiful Bill, which is going to transfer nearly $1 trillion of Americans' wealth to the top 1%, that adds nearly $4 trillion to the debt, that's going to kick tens of millions of Americans off of their health care, deeply unpopular. He's not going to be able to maintain the very narrow majority that he holds right now in the House of Representatives along this current trajectory. And recognizing that, he's taken this step of asking Texas mid-decade to redraw its congressional districts. This is already the state, by the way, that is toughest in the nation in which to register to vote, harder than any other state in the union in which to actually cast a ballot. It's had more than 750 polling place closures in the last 10 years, far more than the next closest state in terms of closures, almost all of them in the fastest growing Black and brown neighborhoods. It's already very hard to vote in Texas. It's already heavily gerrymandered. It already has really bad problems with vote in mail. So a state that was already something less than democracy is about to descend even further unless we fight back. And I'm sure at some point we're going to have an opportunity to talk about what that fight looks like, but I think that's where we have to land.
I will definitely get to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. And then Norm, How unusual is it to have, just zooming out to the country, just tell us about how redistricting is supposed to work. Once a decade, based on the census. I mean, I think that's how most of us think about it.
The core American idea is that in the United States, the people choose their leaders. The leaders do not get to choose their voters. The whole process of having congressional districts is supposed to be done with an eye towards maximizing the votes of the American people. How can we most accurately capture? Now, you do have to draw districts. I'm a lifelong member, as Neera knows, sometimes to her pleasure, occasionally to her chagrin. We've been friends for decades, of the reform wing. So in order to achieve this more perfect redistricting, to achieve this more perfect union, we had the idea, instead of letting the politicians cheat and draw the districts to maximize their self-preservation in government, let's have independent experts, state by state, draw districts. And we had a movement. I've testified in support of that. But we're in a moment now where we have a leader in the White House who is advocating. He said he wants to be a dictator on day one, and he's never abandoned that ambition. And this is the latest example, and it's deeply unpopular with the American people. This is the latest example. It's not even, you're supposed to do redistricting every 10 years. He's cutting in midstream to recut these districts to hold on to power. And as Beto says, and as Neera does every day, and Power to the People also does this every day, we have got to fight this. We've got to fight it in the court of public opinion, and we've got to fight it in the court of law, because it is the latest dictatorial, authoritarian, autocratic move by this president, and it cannot be tolerated.
Let me just follow up on that, and then I'll come to Beto. Just make the connection between this kind of action. And, a lot of people think all politicians are cynical. They try to rewire the game all the time. Make the connection between a mid-decade redistrict after, at this particular moment in time, and how you see an authoritarian streak.
It's cheating to draw boundaries rather than to represent the voters, the democratic idea, to pick your voters so you'll win. If you look at some of these crazy maps that you get where districts meander, I've seen some modeling of what the Texas legislature will have to do. It looks like a jigsaw puzzle cut by someone on LSD. I mean, that is not democracy. So this is the latest example. In Neera, we've seen it as part of the work we do at Democracy Defenders Fund. We have over 100 legal matters challenging the Trump administration. We've taken on other things like this. The president tried to do an executive order, again, to break the voting system, to favor his voters and to disfavor everyone else. We went to court a few blocks from here, and we, with our wonderful coalition partners, got a preliminary emergency relief saying you can't do that. It's against the Constitution. So this is even worse. As Beto says, it's already bad in Texas. The playing field is tilted. Trump is trying to tilt the playing field so sharply that really the opponents, it's more like rock climbing than it is a level playing field. That is not democracy. And by the way, that's how Orban did it in Hungary, every cycle making it harder and harder for his opponents. That's how Erdogan did it in Turkey. We don't want an authoritarian regime in the United States. We must fight this.
Yes, and I mean, it's also authoritarian to change the rules so your opponents cannot win elections, or you make it much harder for them to win elections. As you said, that's exactly what Orban did. Beto, Governor Newsom last week, over the last couple of weeks, has been saying, I have my eyes on Texas. If they redistrict, we should consider redistricting. House Democrats are talking to other states. People, the counter to that is if blue states redistrict, they're just as bad as Republican states. So what's your response to that argument that we shouldn't, it's like two wrongs don't make a right?
Yeah. If I could just add something to what
please,
Norm said, and I want to answer your question, but in addition to everything that you laid out, we already have an authoritarian president who is routinely defying the Constitution, ignoring co-equal branch of government, the federal courts, dismantling and destroying congressionally chartered and mandated agencies, whether it's USAID or the Department of Education, unconstitutionally sweeping everyday Americans up off the street by plainclothes, masked federal agents who do not have a warrant or a badge, nor will they afford you due process before they illegally detain you, arrest you, imprison you, and deport you to a country to which you've never been, into a gulag from which you will never come out of. So that's already happening. And then to Norm's point, this is a guy who promised us he would be a dictator, who said if you just vote in 2024, you'll never have to vote again, and who has told us that he will serve a third term in office. Believe this guy when he tells you what he's going to do. Past performance is the best predictor of future behavior. When it was time for him to leave after the first term, what did he do? He incited an insurrection, a coup attempt, which we narrowly survived. The greatest attack on this democracy, certainly in the lifetime of anyone in this room. Arguably, you'd have to go back to the Civil War to find something that was more perilous. So I just want to make sure everyone understands the stakes before I answer Neera's question, because in another time and given another set of circumstances, okay, I buy the argument that, if we don't like Republicans doing it, we certainly shouldn't do it as well. But this is for the very future and fate of the Republic. We lose it, you will never, ever get it back. And so not only do I think we should meet fire with fire, and Gavin Newsom, who has a trifecta in California and could arguably increase Democratic congressional advantage there, not only do I think he should do this, I don't think he should wait for Texas. In other words, why the fuck are we responding and reacting to the other side instead of taking the offense on these things? I mean, Republicans care about power more than they care about anything else, whether it's right or wrong, ethics, morality, the Constitution, the rule of law, self-government. Democrats care more about being right than they care about being in power, and we have to change that. We have to be ruthlessly focused on winning power. I think that's why we have to do this.
So let me translate, Beto, into some of the discourse in Washington, right? So I think the point here is, we went through some of this over the last decade where states were doing the right thing, as you noted, and blue states were doing commissions, et cetera. But at this moment, just to say, I think the issue with the Texas redistrict is it's a further illustration of putting aside norms for the game.
I hate it when norms get put aside. I take it as a personal insult.
Yeah, it's not going so well for Norm right now, but norms. Just to say, to distill this a little bit, it's in a world in which one side is seemingly ignoring not just norms, but sometimes laws in order to gain political power. How do you assess that, Norm Eisen, as how do we counter that, right? And how do we counter that in this moment, given where you've been on some of these issues in the past?
Number one, three of us were talking about this in the green room beforehand. You have to come to the moment with a fighting spirit. And last week, we won the very first at Democracy Defenders Fund. With our terrific coalition partners, we won the very first class certification and preliminary injunction after the Supreme Court said you have to do a class action to fight depriving some babies born here of citizenship, birthright citizenship. I started work, thank you. That was an applause line, thank you. We started work on that lawsuit in summer of 2024, knowing, as Beto says, knowing that one of the major party candidates was determined to impose a dictatorial, un-American vision on our country. The first version of that case was filed on January 20th, within an hour or two of Donald Trump signing the birthright executive order. And the new version was filed within 2 hours of the Supreme Court saying you need to have a class action predicate, a basis to protect, to get a nationwide injunction on birthright citizenship. So I think you have to come, and we're looking at the legal remedies already. I think you have to come with a fighting spirit, even more important than not bringing a knife to a gunfight is to bring a fighting spirit to a gunfight. That's the first thing you have to do. So you do that. It's second. It's very important to consider legal remedies. Now, it's going to be tough because the Supreme Court has also, it's not just that Donald Trump has seized.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about this.
Has seized authoritarian power. He's been enabled by the abandonment, by the MAGA majorities in the Congress, and I'm sorry to say, in the Supreme Court of the United States. So the other two branches of power are what should be a check and balance, have abandoned their checking and balance. But the good news is you can bring fighting spirit, number one. Number two, find places you can fight, like in litigation. There will be massive litigation over this. The Supreme Court has made it tougher. It's not impossible. Number three, you have to fight in the court of public opinion. And to be honest, that's part of why we're here. The American people are revolted. If you look at the immigration issue, the American people are revolted by Donald Trump using massive government power to crack down on essentially our friends and neighbors, not criminals. They're folks who are here making a living, paying more into our country than they take out and making our economy function. So you need to use those pressure points in the court of public opinion. And I think that structure now needs to be applied to this redistricting fight. We need to be loud about it. We need to litigate it. And we need to come out swinging, not wait for the other side to strike the first blow.
So can I just follow up on that, and then I'll go back to you, Beto, on Texas and the response inside of Texas. But Norm, I think it is important to provide some context here, which is we have argued for one person, one vote for a long time. Like these dramatic gerrymanders basically undermine one person, one vote, right? Because it's essentially dilutes the power of votes in multiple districts. But we should also recognize that the Supreme Court has allowed blatantly political gerrymandering that has diluted voting. And so it is important for us to stand up for these principles, but it's also important to recognize that North Carolina did a post 2020 redistrict. That redistrict provided extra seats. Those seats were basically the cushion to the majority. If North Carolina had not redistricted those seats, you could be even in the House or possibly a Speaker Jeffries. So, we need to internalize all of those lessons and also recognize the court is not on our side on these issues.
Well, Cap is such a leader. All of us who do work in the field, it's not just log rolling. I actually rely on Cap for the policy prescriptions. The adversaries of democracy in our country have spent decades making the Supreme Court an issue. And as part of our affirmative agenda that we must have, we need to call out the court. We need to, and we're going to have dramatic court reform, and we're going to need to have nationwide voting reforms of the kind that were considered in the For the People Act that was before Congress. the last time we had a trifecta, there wasn't a sufficient sense of urgency. I favored, we have a exception for budgets, for money, called reconciliation. We've just been through the reconciliation process. All you need is 51 votes. Shouldn't we also, if budgets matter that much, shouldn't we have democracy reconciliation so that issues like redistricting can be addressed nationally so you don't get these crazy election stealing maps? So I advocated for having an exception there. There was a debate about that. I think that the pro-democracy caucus in the country needs to focus on these issues. That has to be, fixing these issues has to be electorally salient, irrespective of party. These should be nonpartisan priorities for how our democracy runs.
Yeah, so just to clarify there, just to build on what you're saying, the national legislation would have ensured that you didn't have this kind of level of gerrymandering across the state. So every state would be governed by that, so you wouldn't be in this kind of race to the bottom where Texas redistricts and then California redistricts and then Alabama redistricts. You'd have a national floor that was much more based on democracy, which was part of the legislation that hopefully we will revisit again if we have democracy, which I'll come back to. But on Texas, Beto, could you just share what the options are for how the Texas Democrats or others can respond, and just what's the timeline of action here so we can all understand what not only Texas Democrats or people in Texas should be doing, but we should all be doing?
Give me the day I can sue, please, Beto. I need to circle it on my calendar.
Well, hopefully you won't have to sue because we'll defeat it.
Yeah, that would be great. I think... So I guess the kind of the bad news related to this, and following what Norm just said, is that in Texas we don't really have a democracy, and I would argue we really don't have one in America at large. And I think maybe the consensus now post 2024 was it was awfully confusing for people to hear Democrats argue that we should save our democracy, because everyday Americans were wondering what it is that we were saving. A democracy, is that where one person can spend almost $300 million to elect their preferred candidate for the presidency? Is a democracy one in which members of Congress can choose their own voters? Is a democracy a place where corporations are people and money is speech, and corporations can spend whatever they want to not just affect, but to purchase the outcomes of elections? And about those Democrats, in the wake of Shelby versus Holder, which eviscerated the Voting Rights Act, which we are responsible for passing in 1965 as a party and as a people, thanks to a 24-year-old John Lewis. When we had that trifecta in 2021, and we had the For the People Act or the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, we had the opportunity to actually protect the people in Texas. We had the power. It wasn't something we could blame on Republicans. We had the numbers to get this done. We just said to the American people, it's just not that important. And so that's what lands us here. That's the bad news. The good news is we do have ways in which we can fight back. One, I mentioned the opportunity in California, or potentially if there's anything to squeeze out of Illinois or New York or other states where Democrats hold unitary power. Number two, the Democratic members of the state house can walk out and deny their Republican colleagues a quorum with which to redraw these boundaries. It's a tall order. They're fined $500 a day every day that they're not in quorum. They get paid something like $11,000 or $12,000 a year. Many of them have other jobs as well, but they'll have DPS state troopers coming after them. In Trump's America, would not be surprised if they had DHS or FBI or Secret Service or any other federal law enforcement agency hunting them down to drag them back to the state capitol. But if they're able to stay away long enough, and I think we've been very clear about what the stakes are in this fight, not only can they deny this redistricting, but I think they will really rally this country right now. We have very few rally points. We had one at the CR, the funding to keep the government open a few months back, which we just fucked up as a party. Thank you, Chuck Schumer. This was our chance to stand and fight and to deny Trump and Musk the money that they were asking for to spend on whatever they chose, to deny them the freedom to eviscerate and destroy this federal government, and we absolutely folded. This is the next big fight. It is Texas. I don't know how many more we're going to get before the midterms, and you want to at least get caught trying. You want to get out there and give it everything you can, and you want to win, obviously. You want the outcome that you are pursuing, but you also want to inspire your fellow Americans, show them the example in their own fights, in their own states, and in their own places. And the third opportunity to fight back is if these, God forbid, new districts are drawn, they will be drawn at the expense of existing Republican majority districts. They'll have to bleed out some Republican voters to make these other districts more competitive for Republicans. So it may actually put more districts in play, taking a page out of Norm's book and not waiting to react to begin action. We're already out there, as you said earlier, registering eligible, likely Democrats who are not currently on the rolls. And then because this is the toughest state in the nation in which to cast a ballot, we personally stay in touch with each and every single one of those newly registered voters to make sure that they can navigate our voting laws on voter ID, polling places, everything else that they throw in front of you to try to keep you from voting in the first place. So 3 clear ways in which we can fight back. We must pursue them all in parallel. And I do think there's a chance that we can win this one.
Great. Norm, did you want to jump in there?
I think that I believe we still do have a democracy, if an imperfect one. But the stakes, the reason that Texas redistricting matters so much is because it could tilt the 2026 outcome. And 2026 is really for all the marbles, because if you are unable to at least get a pro-democracy majority in one house of Congress, if you can't break that monopoly on constitutional power that MAGA has at the moment assembled, and also particularly in our down ballot races, governor, AG, Secretary of State, also 26. By the way, we'll get an important preview, I think, in 2025, Virginia, New Jersey, the Pennsylvania races, including for the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. That's the tipping point. 2026 is the tipping point. And Donald Trump knows that. Yeah. That's why he's focusing. He knows it can come down to a handful of races in the House of Representatives. That's why democracy is really at stake in this Texas fight. And all of us need to reconsider all of the options that are on the table to make it count.
Could I ask?
Yeah.
Could I ask you a question? So I take your point, or at least understand your perspective on this still being a democracy. So I don't know what you thought of what you would call America, post Reconstruction to 1965. Is it a democracy or not? If you're black, and in many states, if you're brown and you can't cast a ballot, I don't think it is. Functionally and effectively in Texas, you have drawn out and locked out millions of people, discriminating based on age, on race, on ethnicity, on geography. To me, it's something less than a democracy. It's not an autocracy. It's not a dictatorship yet. I think you're right on that. Here's a larger point that I wanted to make, is getting back to this idea of whether we're going to be on defense or offense. I think we have to share with our fellow Americans a vision of what it would be like to live in a democracy. Like if you didn't have big money in politics, if you were able to overturn Citizens United, if members of Congress couldn't be involved in choosing their own voters, if you had term limits so that you can't serve for the rest of your natural life with all the power that incumbency brings to that, if in other words, you really do return that power back to the people, I think there's got to be some way that we acknowledge that this is not either it's not a democracy, it's not the democracy that we often talk about and tout to the rest of the world, because I think that's closer to the reality that Americans are living through. And so many young people that I'm listening to are just like, the hell with this. I get that this is rigged. This thing doesn't work. I'm not going to participate. I think if we acknowledge that, and at least are candid with them, there may be a chance to work with them and say, hey, you're right, this thing isn't working the way it should. Would you join me in the fight to make sure that it ultimately does, not just stopping the bad guys?
So can I follow up on this point? Because I think this is like a really important kind of meta point almost, which is when we're talking about political reform and we're talking about democracy, I think a question here is, how do we get through the two different sides of the river here, right? Which is, if we say the system is rigged, right? If we constantly are like, acknowledge the system is rigged. The system is obviously rigged in multiple ways. But then how does that inspire people? Does that inspire people to action, or does that actually demobilize people because they just acknowledge the system is rigged? But then if we don't acknowledge this, if we don't discuss where people are, then how do we also not seem in on it, right? So I think the challenge, right now we have, from my perspective, speaking for me, the most corrupt administration I have ever seen. It's like innovating in the ways it's corrupt. It's corrupting
the envy of corruptors around the world.
It's like the level of creativity for corruption.
If there were an Ig Nobel Prize for mastering corruption, Donald Trump would get it.
And one of the challenge was with mobilizing people on this topic is look, people are disgusted. I'm not saying they aren't, but one of the challenges is that they're like, everybody does it, right? Like, politicians, blah, blah, blah. And so I think this is like a crucial question of how do we acknowledge. I do think that means that when you have power, you actually have to do things like end stock trades, et cetera. But I also think we have to figure out how we don't create the rationale for people to exit the system. And I think a little bit of that has happened too. If we're all constantly saying, they're all terrible and there's no difference. Voting Rights Act, even in what you said just a few minutes ago, 99.9% of Democrats voted for the John Lewis Act. There were 2 who wouldn't overturn the filibuster. So it's not like the parties were the same on this. They were radically different. I think those 2 senators were wrong. They aren't actually in power anymore. But you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like the parties were the same and ignoring the Voting Rights Act. And I just think we have to figure out how we navigate to be honest with people about the level of corruption and the fact that people, in a sense, buy elections here in a way that they don't in other countries, right? That is a base problem. But if we also just say, we don't really have a democracy, does that turn more people out of the system, off the system, or into the system? And I think that's just a big question.
That's been the core question of political leadership in the United States since 1789. And Beto, I don't disagree with any of the predicates, really, that you analyze any of the flaws. But I believe there's still, and it's harder, but there's still an avenue for the American people to express their will and for us to resume my law school classmate and friend and boss as the White House ethics czar when I had all these issues in my portfolio. I was the first one to go in and tell him when Citizens United was was noted for re-argument, this is not going to be good for the home team.
So just to say you're about to say Barack Obama.
Barack Obama likes to talk about American democracy as an act of becoming. And of course, even at our highest points, we were a highly flawed democracy. And I'll tell a very short story. Because we litigate so much, there was a New York Times article yesterday which described us as having scores of cases, like nobody can count how many there are. And we debate internally, like how many hundreds do we actually have? In all those scores of cases, we in the coalition we work with have been up to the Supreme Court a lot. And we got several adverse decisions in the Supreme Court. And But in most of those, like with that birthright citizenship case where we were back in court in 2 hours, the court will often say something. And there was one where we had gotten an injunction with our wonderful team, and labor was a part of this, particularly the federal labor unions and the wonderful Altshuler-Burzon firm in San Francisco. We got an injunction of OPM firing probationary employees. And we protected for a very long time the jobs of tens of thousands of probationary employees. The Supreme Court abrogated the injunction. They say, well, the standing, you may not have standing this way, but they kind of gave us a hint what standing would look like. Well, the next morning we were back in court. We had a new injunction by the end of the week on those probationary employees, and that has not gone back up to the court. The playing field of our democracy is tilted. It's very sharply tilted in Texas. More than, the states are little labs, Brandeis said, of democracy, but they can also be little labs of autocracy. That's what you have in Texas. We have that in Florida. We have that in other places. But that can be undone. As in Wisconsin, they had that. They got rid of the Scott Walker autocracy. Yes, the playing field is a little slanted, but we can, if we work extra hard, we can still run up that playing field together. And Neera, it's not faith, it's evidence-based hope that leads me to say we are still a democracy. Look, I'll say one last thing. I've gone on too long about this. Again, it's relevant to the Texas example. Look at what happened when voters actually went to the polls in Trump's wannabe dictatorship. He has not captured that flag yet of dictatorship because of all the pushback, despite the many horrible things he's done. Look at what happened when they went to the polls in Wisconsin, April 1st. It was a state Supreme Court race. They refashioned it as a referendum on Trump and Musk's authoritarianism, the people versus Trump and Musk. It was an unexpected landslide. We're suing Musk over this also. Basically, any issue you raise, I have a lawsuit. Musk spent $25 million for nothing in Wisconsin. It made the landslide worse. So I think, writ large, there's hope. Now, it's much, much harder in Texas, and we do have our hands full because it's a little lab of authoritarianism. So I only disagree, in the bottom line, I don't disagree with any of the data points that you offer.
All right, but we're going to turn to questions. Beto, did you want to respond to that at all?
If I could try to get this in quickly.
Yeah, of course.
The reason I bring up 2021, and I think the points you made were excellent about the two senators we were dealing with who wouldn't help us with the filibuster, wouldn't help us get this stuff passed. But, I think we've got to learn from this, and we've got to understand what happens when, for whatever good, arguable reasons, we fail to use that power to help the people that we purport to serve. 1890, I'm sure Norm and Neera, you know this example well. After all these election outrages, particularly in Texas, where poll workers are lynched, where ballot boxes are literally stolen at gunpoint, there's a federal Voting Rights Act that is proposed in Congress in 1890. And the pro-democracy party at the time, the Republicans, they have a trifecta. They have a president who ran on voting rights, they have a Republican Senate, and they have a Republican House. The House passes the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act gets held up on the horns of a filibuster led by Congressman, I think, Koch from the state of Texas, who says, let us deal with the black people the way that we know how to deal with the black people. And because they had excuses for other pressing political considerations, they let it be. And so for 75 years, we entered this darkness of Jim Crow, something far less than a democracy, until it was won again by, John Lewis, among others, crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And in that case, to answer your earlier question about whether we should level with people, I mean, we could tell, as Kennedy and then Johnson were, the rest of the world, we're this great democracy. We stand for freedom against the Soviet Union and tyranny and dictatorship. But people in Selma, Alabama could tell you, you're full of shit. I am black and I can't get on the rolls. I cannot cast a ballot. This is not a democracy. So the leveling came through John Lewis and others beaten nearly to death on that bridge, those images transmitted across the country and around the world. And as you know, in 8 days, like light speed in DC, Johnson convenes a joint session of Congress and makes this epic voting rights speech and puts Lewis in the pantheon with the folks at Concord and Lexington, at Appomattox. These folks who are willing to lay down their lives for this noble idea and promise that, to yours and Barack Obama's point, has yet to be realized. It is always in the act of becoming. So, I think the truth always wins out. And if we're on the side of the truth and we're the ones carrying the truth, all the better for us. So I know that it can seem dispiriting, and I've also had that question, when I'm running for office in Texas, should I tell people how hard it is because then maybe they're not gonna wanna vote, or do I tell people how hard it is so that they'll trust me as a truth bearer and so that they are not surprised when they're challenged at the polling place, and maybe it pisses them off as well and gives them another urgent reason to try to cast that ballot. So just wanted to give you my thinking behind it.
Yeah, great. Do people have questions? If with a question, you can just announce who you are, and if you're with an organization, that would be great. There's one over there.
Hi, my name is Senkai, and I work at the Carnegie Endowment. In what seems like a half a generation ago, I worked on policy on the Harris campaign, and something we tried to do in the closing weeks was we tried to warn people that Trump was a danger to democracy. We talked about how John Kelly said he'd be a dictator. Unfortunately, it didn't work. And so what I wanted to ask is, what do you all think about what really needs to change and how Democrats talk about why democracy matters to ordinary people and about what it can do to deliver and improve their lives, particularly given, as we've talked about, it hasn't really been working very well?
Beto, you want to take that?
I'll start, but thanks for this question. I think that message, well-intentioned, and I was all for it, was really confusing to people. And to Neera's point about whether we level with folks about a rigged system, I think we're now coming to understand that most of America knew we had a rigged economy before Democrats, or most Democrats, or some Democrats at least, were saying that stuff out loud. Now maybe everyone has acknowledged the truth. In that same way, we've got a rigged democracy. Maybe it's better than saying we don't have a democracy. We have a rigged democracy. I don't know. We'll see what Norm says. But if you're the party, as we appeared to be, that is all about saving institutions, and by extension the status quo, and those institutions and that status quo are not working for you, or don't appear to be working in the case of democracy and voting if you live in Texas and maybe some of these battleground and swing states, then you can be forgiven for saying, you know what, maybe I take a pass on this one. If instead, with the benefit of hindsight, we had said, hey, this thing is badly broken, and I understand exactly why it's not working for you. I don't want to save anything. I want to build something that's actually going to deliver for you. Economically, this is what it looks like. And for democracy, this is what it looks like. When I was running for Senate in 2018 in Texas, long time ago, I cannot tell you how many young people would come to my events, which is always a surprise when you see young people involved in politics. And they said, the number one reason I'm here, I could give a shit about the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or partisan politics at all. You don't take PAC money. You don't take PAC money from corporations. You don't take PAC money from Planned Parenthood or the Sierra Club. You don't take any PAC money. I love that because this system is so corrupt and so broken, and I was gonna sit this one out until I saw you do this. So, it's one of these tricks where you can't just say the right thing, you have to do the right thing. For people to believe you. If you can pull that off, I think you give people the opportunity to believe and to participate, and importantly, to vote. And we saw young voter turnout in Texas in 2018 increase 513% over the previous midterm election. I think acknowledging a broken system and running differently had something to do with it.
Do you want to respond, Norm?
Yeah, I think the Harris campaign as a referendum on American democracy, the outcome was overdetermined. But looking forward to continuing to making the argument, I do think that the American people now have seen the meaning of that dictatorship in the cruel crackdown on innocent people who simply want to. My father was an undocumented migrant to this country in 1940, was supposed to continue on to Cuba from Poland. He looked around Baltimore, he said, I like it here. And he stayed, and he served in the military in World War II, became a citizen. That's a real life experiment with the meaning of dictatorial cruelty. I think, and there's much more beyond that, I think that people will understand it in a more visceral way, and you actually are going to see, I wouldn't call it a rigged democracy because that suggests that you can't unrig it. I would call it an imperfect democracy or one in which, like we have there's extra gravitational democracy pull that we have to jump a little harder, but that we can still win. Number two, so you see the outcomes. Number two, it's it's hit the American people in the pocketbook now, this authoritarianism, because you have the big, brutal betrayal bill, the BBB. Tens of millions of Americans had their health care and food help and their jobs stolen by Trump to give tax breaks to billionaires who don't need them. That does not poll well. So that's a second place. And I do think, to Beto's point about youth and about the next generation, when Neera and I were in the Obama administration, we were told personnel is policy. I think Sandy Berger might have taught me that. He was such a wonderful teacher. The other thing he told me, the best thing he said to me one time, Norm, do you like reading? Do you like forming ideas and thinking new things? Oh, I love that. He said, you're not going to get to do any of that when you're in government. Do it all now because you'll have no time. So I think personnel is policy, and we need those youth. We need those new voices. We need, who is going to carry this banner forward of the affirmative, not just the negative, that Trump has devastated our communities and is hitting us in the wallet. I disagree with James Carville, who keeps writing the same. I love him. But I disagree with him that it's enough to be negative. We need a positive agenda of what we're going to deliver for the American people.
Great. We have a question online.
From a member of our online audience, how do we as everyday people hold members of Congress and the justices on the Supreme Court to account as they avoid upholding their duty to the Constitution and their constituents and are aiding in authoritarian overreach?
Do you want to start that, Norm, and then Beto?
Sue them constantly. Just go to court, keep forcing the issue. God bless the lower federal courts, and we're litigating in state courts too. They get it. And it's not just Democratic appointees. It's Republican appointees. It's Reagan and Bush 1 and Bush 2. And Trump judges have ruled against him in most of the cases. So that has been a bastion. And then, you got to hold them accountable by talking to the American people and really getting landslides like they got in that Wisconsin election.
We've been holding these town halls all across the state of Texas, primarily in congressional districts where the representative will not herself or himself hold a town hall meeting. And it's extraordinary the number of people who are coming out to these things. And it begins to provide a measure of accountability. At a minimum, we get to listen to one another. And that representative, I'm sure, is picking up the readout from these meetings. And if we were to administer truth serum to any member of Congress, their number one priority is their reelection. And when they see that jeopardized, that will begin to change their behavior. Right now, they fear Trump more than they fear anything else. As soon as they start to fear their voters, we're going to get better outcomes. And the last thing I'd say on this is that big picture for all of us, if we really, really care about anything that we talked about today, it is Texas, and it is right now. I mean, this fight is on. The special session just started yesterday. You may be seeing or reading in the coming days or weeks that Democratic members make a break to deny quorum. It's going to be an incredibly expensive proposition. We, each and every single one of us, need to have their backs and help to fund that cause, to keep them away for as long as it takes to deny Republicans the ability to redraw their maps. If Gavin Newsom gets out there and redraws California, I think we dispense with the hand wringing and just have his back on that, because power meets power. And then on these congressional races, it is not too soon for us to begin campaigning for recruitment and fielding of candidates, for raising both dollars from donors, but more importantly, meeting voters and volunteers and getting them out there. We've got to win. We've got to win.
Yeah. We have time for one or two more questions, but I wanted to kind of follow up on this broad issue of accountability because, Norm, you've talked about polling, and I definitely read those. But I think one of the challenges of the moment we're in is that the whole idea of redistricting is to overcome the polling. There's broad public opposition. So how do you keep power? You change the rules in order to do it. So I think we have to acknowledge that. And then I also think it's really important to us from an accountability perspective. We were just talking about the Voting Rights Act. You know, when we went through the John Lewis Act, there were a lot of Democrats particularly the two who wouldn't change the filibuster and had concerns that stifled the legislation. They were basically arguing that we should leave it to the states and that this really upset the system. And it was kind of a radical overreach. But now this is a demonstration of exactly the opposite of what they wanted, right? They wanted kind of a return to normal, but by not federalizing an opposition to gerrymandering, we've created the race to the bottom. And so I think it's also important, like when we look at this again, that unless we take bold action, we are actually inducing anti-democratic actions at the state level.
You have to start where we began with that fighting spirit from moment one. And one of the Neera, and Beto, obviously you get it. Neera was not in any doubt, I can tell you, on January 19th. Oh, might Trump, maybe there'll be a new Trump. We knew what was coming.
Right.
He said so. So let's not be deceived. And I will say something about these legislators and also about what Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries have come to do in the United States Congress. If you look at the early days and the fight over the big, brutal betrayal, it was night and day. Those caucuses were unified. They were strong. They spoke out. They highlighted the issue for the country. They've put it on the electoral agenda. But they, like those legislators in Texas who can bust quorum, they did what they could. So, for example, there was a big fight because this was reconciliation, 51 votes. Every provision has to be approved by the parliamentarian, a unified caucus led by Chuck Schumer. I've been following these fights for over 30 years. It was the strongest parliamentary fight and the most unified that I'd ever seen. And it took out, in addition to raising the issue for the country, putting it on the electoral agenda for 26 and these by-elections in 25, it took out a lot of horrible stuff that would have handicapped me in all my cases. There was a thing that would have taken away the power of judges to hold the Trump administration in contempt. Came out in the birdbath. And there were a large number of things like that were pulled out of the bill. So to those Texas state legislators who are considering, will it matter? Yes, fighting, stand, fight every moment, every inch of your being, everything you have, even if you don't have power, use the power you do have to stand up to this dictatorial regime. And I'm looking forward to those Texas legislators breaking quorum.
Yay! We have one last question right here. We'll try to get to. Let's just make the question quick.
Yes. So my husband and I have been rallying pretty much nonstop. I don't like to call it protest. It's more of a rally, right? Because it's all good. We don't say mean things or anything. But what we have seen here, especially near the White House, is we have a lot of very MAGA people coming, and they very loudly and rudely say in front of us to their children, who are wearing MAGA hats, by the way, look at those people over there. They should get a job. It's Sunday, we're pushing 70, we should be working. Or
you look great.
Thank you. Or how much are you getting paid to rally here or to protest? And so my question is, we've seen so many children wearing MAGA hats, so many people, so many children shaking their heads at us. How do we get those young people back from being brainwashed because their parents are saying these things that really are incorrect and wrong?
You know, these protests are breaking through. So on this first point, No Kings, the hands off, the other rallies, protests, public action. There's a reason that Trump's approval on immigration is 35%. I mean, it's because of what he's doing, but it's also because we're communicating in a post-truth, post-subscribe to the daily paper, post-watch broadcast news television, post-watch cable TV, getting 100% of your info on TikTok. The in-person presence breaks through. It's profoundly powerful. Lincoln said it best, public sentiment is everything, more powerful than presidents or legislatures or even courts. With it, everything is possible. Without it, you're not going to get it done. And public sentiment is increasingly on our side right now. So unlike those MAGA people who accosted you, I just want to say thank you for what you're doing. Please keep it up. Don't just do it Sunday, do it Monday through Saturday as well. I think in order to reach people that we have lost or that we might, or we're in danger of losing, we just got to get out there and fight, and then we've got to win. And then when we win power, we really got to use it. I mean, look at how Trump uses power. It is awe-inspiring. He's using it towards evil ends, but he's using the full weight and power of that office, unlike any president who's ever held it. Imagine, in keeping with the Constitution, the rule of law, a Democrat in that White House with a Democratic majority in the House and Senate who are using that office to its extreme possible potency and is unrelenting in the things that we pass, actually turning into changes in people's lives as close to real time as you can get it, shamelessly signing the checks if you have to do that. Joe Biden was arguably, along with the incredible people with whom he worked, the most successful president of my 52 years on this planet. I think he almost maximized what he could have done out of that office, maybe communicated it a little bit more clearly, a little bit better. And then also, if we could blow through some of that bureaucracy to get some of this stuff started and changing in people's lives, I think that breeds the success and the turnaround that we're looking for. But we got to win first. We got to win first, and we got to use power ruthlessly for good.
I guess the only thing I'd say to just come in just briefly is to say they wouldn't have to lie about you unless it was a threat. They wouldn't have to lie and say you're being paid unless it bothered them that there are people every day who are coming out to save the country. So it's the very fact of lying that makes you know that you're being successful. Okay, one last question over here.
Hi, my name is Cody. I was just going to say, so it was races like yours in 2018 in Texas that really gave a lot of people a lot of hope about Gen Z and being a really good progressive force turning out. We can kind of see that didn't go exactly to plan, but I'm from Florida, and like a lot of my friends, a lot of my queer friends are like, I don't know that I can stay here, but their families have always been there. They just don't feel that red states can be their home. But especially with you being on the ground, I was just kind of wondering, like, how are you able to communicate to, or convincing young people that these truly purple states are worth fighting for and sort of worth staying in?
Great question.
Yeah, the problem doesn't get any better by you leaving unless you are the problem, right? So if you leave, who's left to stay and fight? And just so you know, I've had these same doubts. I'm a fourth generation Texan, fourth generation El Pasoan. But Amy and I, after this last election, we're walking in the mountains in the Franklins, and we were like, this state has the most obscene abortion ban, no exception for rape or incest or the life of the mother. We're raising a 17-year-old. Are we doing wrong by her? This state leads the nation in school shootings. Not a single thing has changed to make it any less likely that any other child, including our own, meet the same fate as those 19 kids did in Uvalde in May of 2022. Are we doing them wrong? But if we leave this fight because it's hard, because we haven't won in the past, then what the hell are we on this planet for to begin with, right? And I'll tell you, in that 2018 race, not only was it the most amazing experience of my life outside of family, but it actually had some really profound real-world results. 12 Democratic insurgents defeated 12 incumbents for the state house, biggest sea change we'd seen there in a generation. Colin Allred and Lizzie Panel Fletcher won their races against entrenched incumbents. And in Harris County, home to Houston, Texas, the most diverse city in the country, 17 black women won election to judicial positions, literally changing the face of criminal justice in the process. It was so transformative that when the Republican-controlled state legislature met the next time, they changed the voting laws to make it that much harder for anything like that to ever take place again. And so that's my point on this thing being rigged. And I get Norm's point on, we need to also say that we can unrig it, and we can, but we also have to be clear that the courts are not going to ride to our rescue. The Department of Justice, when it was in our hands, did not ride to our rescue with whatever was left of the Voting Rights Act. It's just we, the people, who have to ride to our own rescue in this case, and that comes through winning political power and then using it as aggressively as possible to set things right. So don't give up on Florida. Don't leave. I won't give up on Texas. I won't leave either. Let's stay in this fight for as long as it takes, because it's absolutely worth it, and the alternative is just unthinkable.
Did you want to say one last word? Because this is our last.
How could I possibly top that?
Yeah, you should maybe.
First of all, I'll say to this lady, with the kids wearing the MAGA hats, as the parent myself of a daughter who until recently was a teenager, the surest way to get those kids to be anti-MAGA is to tell them to wear MAGA hats. Just wait until they're teenagers. They will power our movement, Beto. And then and my mother, if she were with us, would vouch for that as well with me. The courts will not save us, but I will say we will not be saved without them. It matters that we went to court and we got that injunction stopping the president's EO to favor his voters and disfavor others. And we saw from 2020 that we went to court over 60 lawsuits. I was involved in many of them, defending the outcomes, defending governors, secretaries of state, AGs, trying to do the right thing. But the courts alone won't save us. And ultimately, it has to be. The ultimate salvation of our country is the American people. And for all the imperfections, and we talked about 1890. We could have talked about the Dred Scott case. We could have talked about Plessy v. Ferguson. We could have talked about our Constitution, which was afflicted, defaced by the idea of slavery. Some people are less than others. For all the imperfections in the American idea, they counted American democracy out. In 1776, that bleak winter. Oh, how could they ever defeat the mightiest empire on earth? And Lincoln, in his darkest days, when you want to talk about fighting, Lincoln couldn't find a general who wanted to fight. It's not a unique problem to 2025, but we won that too. And Jim Crow, that excrescence in our history, we've made strides. There's still more to do, but let us not discount the civil rights movement, which I know no one here does. The Cold War, I was an ambassador in one of those countries that was behind the Iron Curtain. So the mighty Soviet Empire. We won the Cold War as well. So my mother, I'll end on this note. My mother was a Holocaust survivor, a Czechoslovak Holocaust survivor. The house of the U.S. ambassador where I served was the headquarters of the Nazi Wehrmacht, where the orders to deport my mom and her family were given in that house. I returned representing the United States of America and this American idea that has been so powerful and so transcendent. So it's not a faith-based, it's an evidence-based faith that we will turn out in these by-elections in 2025, that 2026 will be a landslide for our democracy, that we will achieve a trifecta again in 2029, and we will finally use it to pass the For the People Act, to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and to take the American idea of democracy the next step forward. That is my belief. Back to you.
Oh my God, great. So I would say in each of those moments of history for the country, our leaders ask themselves, how would their grandchildren think of them in that moment? And I think that's an important thing for all of us to ask. Are we doing enough so that we can look into the eyes of our grandchildren and say, when democracy was on the line, that we did everything we can? And that's essentially what I think today, what Texas, what our democracy at large, all the assaults call for. So thank you to both of you, to, as we can see, strong champions of democracy, both in Texas and around the country. Thank you both.
Thank you, Neera. Gracias.